Hello, and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be doing a first pick top lane tier list. So these are going to be your blindable champions, which you're going to really want to pick if there's not a huge amount of counters within the meta. So this is going to be based on 13.13. If the champ has a lot of counters which are things which are popular or things which are known to be meta at the moment, then that will definitely drop their placement. So let's get into it. To begin with, I'm going to start from the E tier. There is one champ which I want to put here, and that is Yasuo. Yasuo is really punishable by a lot of top laners. I wouldn't recommend playing this champ in the top lane unless you're really looking to just outskill your opponent or just outmatch them. You're not going to really be picking this champ in an environment where you really want to climb. It's more of a for fun pick, but he's better in the mid lane. Definitely consider picking him here. Moving on to the D tier. Sion, I'm going to put him in the D tier. This may surprise you. Sion, known for being kind of blindable as a champion. But overall, just at the moment, I wouldn't recommend picking this champ in mid-elo. He has a lot of counters which are really popular. Things like your Fioras, your Jaxes, your Mordekaisers, your Olafs, your Kleds. A lot of these champs just run over Sion. Like, he really struggles into a lot of these champs. He does well into things like Malphite, but Malphite, you're not really going to see come through as a blind pick. You're mainly going to see Malphite come through as an answer to an AD composition. So overall, I wouldn't recommend playing Sion as a blind pick. Definitely has good matchups though, so look for those windows where you can play him. Yone also falls into kind of a similar bucket as Yasuo, where a lot of champs can punish him. Things like Renekton or just champs which can all in them or sustain back up can really punish both the Wind Brothers, so I definitely avoid Yone as a blindable option as well. Akali can be punished by a lot of champs at the moment. A lot of the champs you'll see in the CDE tier just aren't great in the top lane and usually have a secondary role which they just perform a lot better in. Akali, you're mainly going to want to pick her mid lane. I wouldn't blind her top lane. Sylas, really only coming out as an answer to Malphite. He doesn't really work as a blind pickable top laner. But, of course, with the flex value, you could argue that this champ works if the other person's on the same page as you. Moving on, Cassante. Cassante, just not a great top laner at the moment, in solo queue at least. He requires a lot of games to really get a feel for the champion, for him to start really performing to the same tier as a lot of other tanks. I definitely avoid him. I wouldn't pick him as a blind pickable champ either. He can win into certain matchups, but even then, just in general, I wouldn't pick this champion. Rammus really only comes out as an answer to a very heavy AD composition where maybe they've banned Malphite. You're not really going to see Rammus other than that. Mainly just used as an answer to a lot of things. I wouldn't blind Rammus. Vayne, moving on to our C tier. Vayne is going to be a champ which I'm going to talk about first, where she is good into a lot of things like your Dariuses, your Sions, a lot of tanky targets. She has build options, but overall her kit just gets punished by a lot of champs. If you're blinding Vayne, you can really hurt your composition. You lose, a lot of the time you will lose the option to have a tank if you're picking, if it's solo queue, and obviously top lane is where you're expected to have the tank. A lot of the times you'll see the odd maybe jungle tank, but most of the time top lane tank. And Vayne can kind of hurt that comp, and overall not a great blind pickable top laner, but definitely better than the tier below. Varus is being nerfed next patch, so I'm going to put him in the C tier. He can work as a blind option if they see him as being like the ADC, and then you can get a good matchup through that. But really, you're not going to blind Varus. He's mainly just used as an answer into a lot of tanks. Aatrox, kind of weak at the moment. Still really popular, but definitely punishable by a lot of champions. Does win into a decent amount more than a lot of the other options, but overall, just not really blinding Aatrox. Good as an answer. Volley, weak at the moment. Good as an answer into a lot of things. Can beat out things like Darius, stuff like that, which are always relatively popular within the meta. Kennen, usually considered a very blindable AP champion. Can get punished in solo queue. He does work into a lot of matchups, but definitely punishable. Gangplank can be very heavily punished by certain champions within the top lane. Pretty sure he can be punished quite comfortably by things like Argot, things like Fiora, I'm pretty sure punish GP. I think he even loses to things like Malphite these days, but overall, just not a champ you're really going to want to be blinding. Good as an answer when you really need a lot of control within your team comp. Moving on, Heimerdinger. Heimerdinger doesn't see a lot of play in the top lane. can be blind pick because it's kind of unexpected. And some of the champs do have cheese value, things like your Heimerdingers, your Warwicks, your Sejuanis, things that either aren't played a huge amount or just have value in the fact that their kit just allows for really high instances of burst damage. That is definitely something you've got to keep like a eye on. But if you're in a Heimerdinger is expected to play top lane, there are answers to it, so I would avoid picking him blind. Yorick is definitely someone who has a lot of hard matchups. Things like Aurelia can quite heavily punish Yorick. He also loses to things like Renekton, and a lot of the popular champs can punish him. He beats Darius, but a lot of champs can beat Darius because of functions within the kit. Things like Mundo, of course, can beat Darius. I can't find Yorick. There we go, it's Yorick. Kayn, more of just a Droot special. I wouldn't blind pick Kayn, but he comes with like a cheese factor, so keep that as an option. Aurelia, not really blindable at the moment. Definitely in the past has been a lot better of an option, but these days can struggle into a lot of matchups. Kayle can get heavily punished by a lot of champions. Things like Nasus really hurt Kayle. Wukong, days of Wukong top are kind of over at the moment, but definitely can win into a lot of champions. Just not really great as a blindable option. Graves, I would want to put higher, but his item build just isn't great for him at the moment. He really values things like Duskblade and Youmuu's, and overall their power in the top lane is nullified by a lot of the stats and the tankiness of a lot of the champions here. The value of Graves blind comes from the fact that he's good wave clear, but as a lot of champions can itemize into wave clear at the moment, with things like Static, Ravenous, Titanic, all these being relatively popular, and a lot of champs just having inherent wave clear, Graves just doesn't fill the same function he needed back along, where you can just like default hold lane or default like survive through lane. So I'm going to put him down in the C tier. Gnar just gets punished by a lot of champions at the moment. When Gnar is strong, he's an incredible blind pick, but in his current state where he's not particularly great, I wouldn't put Gnar as a blindable option. Sejuani, mainly just for a cheese factor. She's not really played along the top lane anymore, but when she is, she can work quite nicely into a couple of champions, things like Darius, and just the overall fact that she has good wave clear and her damage can become as quite unexpected, gives her that edge sometimes. Swain, now moving on to the B tier. Swain, pretty good as a blind pickable option, just not a huge amount of games top lane. Swain's value really comes from the fact that he can play from a good distance away from enemy top into bad matchups. He can beat a lot of matchups when he hits level 6. His wave clear is pretty good. So overall, just gives him a lot more tools to work with. Nasus, I would you'd think of Nasus as not being a very blindable champion with a lot of like punishes, but Nasus kind of hard to punish at the moment. His ult can be spammed a lot more freely. His passive with the lifesteal also quite valuable at the moment and can make him sustain for a lot of lanes. And overall, it just gives him a strong ability to just hold out. And if your Nasus can hold out, then he has a really, really strong late mid game. So overall, Nasus is blind pickable, as being a blind pickable option, definitely has increased value. Poppy is just a good all-rounder. She's mainly used as an anti-dash champion, but her overall value with the ult and just being able to kind of harass with her passive and the Q being able to do good amounts of wave clear, just give Poppy a just a decent amount in the top lane and can allow her to be blind picked. Gragas would have been a lot higher in this tier list, but with the nerfs coming through to his passive sustain, not quite the same blind pickable top laner. He's definitely a lot more punishable, and that's why he is in the B tier. Argot, not a bad option. Can go things like the Titanic if you're really getting quite heavily punished and you just want to be able to wave clear from a distance. Now, he does have the problem where he's constantly forced into shoving wave. He has a lot of AoE, natural AoE, which does create this kind of problem, and he can get punished by other top laners through this. But if you're just holding out as Argot, you can get to points where you can just shove wave, sit back, and just kind of do this on repeat, and it does make him kind of hard to punish. Mundo, just really good sustain. His early levels of like 1 to 5 can be punished quite heavily. He really just like sits back, Q pokes, ease through wave to get the CS, stuff like this, but can be punished by certain champions. So overall, not as blind pickable as the tiers above, but still not a bad option. Warwick has a lot of value in his cheese factor, good sustain. Doesn't quite have the same wave clear as a lot of other champions, but his overall just sustain gives him more options into a lot of matchups, and he can just beat out a lot of matchups in general. Udyr has AoE in his R, which can give him decent value as a blind pickable option. He's also a top jungle flex, so he has value there. Has options in build. He can go things like the Triforce, he can go things like the Demonics, and those all work out to kind of give him a decent spot as a blindable top laner. Rumble, just good AoE. Like, he has really strong AoE with his Q. He can bully out a lot of top laners. There are champs which definitely do punish him if he's like, in bad matchups where you blind Rumble. But as he can win out against a lot more matchups, he's not bad as a blind pickable top laner. Gwen beats most tanks, beats some like a decent amount of bruisers as well at the moment, and in turn gives her a level of blindable value. And what you'll find is a lot of these champions just fall to Jax, and Jax is really popular at the moment. Jax I would consider one of the best top laners, if not the best, as like a all-round low to high elo, good hybrid mix of damage, just good damage in general, and overall just gives Jax a lot of general power, which is why a lot of these champs, if they can't if they can ban Jax and then perform against a lot of champions, it really increases their value as a blind pickable champion. But if they ban Jax and then they also have to like ban other champions or just fear other champions, then they do lose a decent amount of value in that. Trundle, really good answer into a lot of AD champions, but blindable, not quite, but as he does win into tanks and bruisers most of the time, not bad as well, so definitely an option there. Cho'Gath once was in the D tier when I did my last one 6 months ago. This was when tanks were horrific and all of them got buffed. Now, not in a bad spot, definitely playable, can win into a lot of lanes. It does get punished by things like your Fioras and a decent amount of other and a couple of other champions, but more blindable than he used to be, definitely. Vladimir, the range, the AoE, just being able to sit back and sustain through most lanes gives him some value there. I wouldn't recommend picking him as a blindable champ. It's more him being here as a one trick, like if you're a one trick of the champion, then he has value because you can play him in the top lane as well as the mid lane. Yeah, some of these champs like Yasuo's Vladimir is definitely a lot more OTP'd than a lot of the champions. Things like Teemo as well, I'm pretty sure is heavily OTP'd. So Teemo is gonna come up as a B tier champ, but more of an answer than a straight up blind pick. Set has ways to just get through laning phase. He has decent sustain. His W has a lot of value. He has decent wave clear, especially if you're itemizing into things like Titanic and Iron Spike Whip. You have value in that. Tahm Kench used to be a lot higher. Kind of struggles into some lanes at the moment though. Can be punished. Just not quite as blindable as he used to be, but pretty safe. Has the E shield, has the sustain, has the range. Jace, good AoE, good range, can run phase rush into a lot of matchups if he's punished. Does have to ban Malphite though. Malphite does stomp on Jace. It's really, really hard of a matchup and basically unlaneable as Jace. Teemo, here as he's not bad as a blindable option because you have options with your runes. You have things like your Ghost is a summer spell. Phase rush is an option in runes. You can give things like your Fleet, your Dark Harvest, your PTA, stuff like this. Gives Teemo value as a blind pickable option. Camille does get answered by a couple of champs in the top lane meta at the moment. Does kind of lose into things like Fiora, I'm pretty sure. Jax also can beat out Camille. Riven has value in the shield, like for wanting to play safe in lane into bad matchups, but overall good amount of dashes, good safety net in that. If she doesn't win the matchup though, she can be really heavily punished. She does lose to things like Argot, definitely. Moving on to the A tier, these are going to be a lot of the champs which can just win into most laning phases or just go even. Things like Shen, really, really good value in his ultimate, gives him a lot of value even outside of laning phase when most champs are like bound to laning phase. Also, just doesn't have a hard time into most matchups. The real problems for Shen come into like your APs, where they're less going to be autoing. Like you don't get value out of your W and your taunt, which are two core parts of your kit, and your passive shield isn't as usable. So yeah, things like Mordekaiser, Cassie can really punish Shen. Rengar, definitely better than a lot of champs on this list. He has value in the W. He can either bully or just kind of sit back and just farm out under turret. Has value in the fact that he's just a really strong late game champion as well, especially if you're getting all your passive stacks. So overall, makes him not bad of an option. Has build options as well. I'm pretty sure you don't really want to go for Divine or Triforce options as much as you used to. They're not as good as they were, but you can go like a more tanky build on Rengar as opposed to things like your Duskblade, your Eclipse, your Youmu's. Singed just has a unique way of playing the game. I did have him in the S tier before, but I think a lot of champions can kind of deal with it or just use this as a way to farm up. There's a lot more scaling going on at the moment, and in time, Singed just in the A tier, wins into a lot of matchups, and matchups which he doesn't win, he could just go into proxying. Ornn does lose to a decent amount of champs, but he's safe in the fact that he has a decent amount of CC, he has a dash which can really like keep him away from a lot of champions. You have rune options in your Phase Rush and your Comet and your Grasp. Phase Rush, definitely something you have to consider taking into things like Darius and Olaf, which can bully you if you don't take it. Jax, really powerful all-rounder at the moment. Does have a couple of bad matchups, so I wouldn't consider him a true blind pick, but definitely an option there. Does lose to things like Alawi. Alawi actually wins against a lot of the meta. You might be surprised to see her in A tier, but she does actually like do quite well as a blind pick. Still punishable with things like Mordekaiser. I definitely recommend banning Mord if you're playing Alawi, but overall, definitely more of a blindable option at the moment. Garen, his passive gives him a great amount of sustain. He can just win out into a lot of lanes at the moment. Phase Rush gives him a good safety net. And overall, just gives Garen a lot of power in the meta at the moment as a blindable option. Akshan, really strong into a lot of champions. Akshan could be almost considered an S tier pick. He's just safe. Well, he's safe. He has high damage. He has good safety. I've said safe twice. Nice. Yeah, like I said, Akshan, safe champ, good damage. The shield quite valuable. Has options as well and build. Overall, just gives him a lot of value. Darius, once again, is a good like blindable option in the fact that he just has a lot of raw power early game, similar to Renekton, who I'm also going to put here. But there are answers to these champions, definitely. There are things like your Mundos, the Sejuani's, but they tend to be more niche things which you don't see a lot of, and that Darius definitely has a lot of value. So overall, still a decent blindable champion. Nico with the changes, definitely really good. It's getting nerfed next patch. Her Q CD going from 7 to 9 to 7 scaling. Overall, does nerf her wave clear, makes her less strong in that regard, but still definitely consider using her as a blindable option. She does win into a lot of matchups and has build options in on here and your AP. Quinn, really performing quite well at the moment. Quinn is definitely a really sleeper OP top laner. She has really strong build options. She has good safety in her kick, her Q being the near sight. Her fleet footwork also gives her value in that. And yeah, just in general, Quinn wins into a lot of matchups at the moment. I'm pretty sure there's like a couple which can punish her, but overall, just in general, Quinn, don't sleep on her. Definitely strong into a lot of champions at the moment. Tryndamere is really powerful in the fact that he is good sustain with Q. People kind of sleep on Tryndamere with the fact that you can run things like D-Shield, Second Wind, and yeah, do Q healing. Just gives him a lot of power in sustaining through a lot of bad matchups. He does win a lot of matchups as well. He has a lot of raw damage, and overall just gives him a lot of power as a blindable option in that. Moving on, Malphite is actually an A-tier blindable option. Malphite, usually seen as a counter pick, actually good as a blindable option. Not a huge amount of AP champs in the meta. Things like your Cassie are more niche, your Mordekaiser, you can ban him, and he's not unplayable against. You just kind of have to play him more safe. you do have options in AP Malphite, Hybrid, or just full tank. There are options in build as well. And overall, just gives him a lot of value as a blindable option, so definitely consider him. He's just generalistically really strong at the moment. And yeah, overall, just easiest amount of power on that. Rise, not seeing a huge amount of play in the top lane, but definitely really valuable wave clear. Wins into a lot of matchups or just neutralizes the lane. Definitely value in that. Pantheon, really powerful as he's got good wave clear, good damage. Can struggle on some matchups, but overall he's like options and builds. You come on things like your Conqueror, your PTA, Eclipse. You don't really want to go more bruisery on Pantheon. He really values high AD amounts in items, but his R gives him good, his R is a good option to get back to lane, and overall just not bad as a champion in the fact that, yeah, overall just good range, good build options, and his R gives him a safety net. Rek'Sai. Rek'Sai, definitely really powerful S tier blindable on the current patch, but with the nerfs coming through to her base health and her AD, I'm going to just drop her down into the A tier. A lot of Rek'Sai's power comes through the sustain on her W passive. It also comes through the fact that she can run things like D-Shield, Second Wind, Hull Breaker. All these options just give her an immense amount of sustain. Quite safe during laning phase as well. Her E gives her a decent enough distance. She beats out most top laners in general at the moment, and overall just makes her really powerful. Definitely an A tier option. Ivan, getting nerfed as well this patch. I would have considered him an S tier, but maybe A, maybe even B next patch. Daisy, really powerful bushes, and his E-Shield just gives him a lot of power in laning phase, makes him really, just gives him a lot of sustain, and it makes him borderline unkillable. Good damage as well, actually really threatening when he has Daisy up. Daisy can almost 1v1 most top laners and just she can just 1v1 most top laners at the moment. They are nerfing her damage and they're nerfing her movement speed next patch, but at the moment, it's kind of nuts, especially when he's Rylai's and Nash's and stuff like this. Daisy is a menace. Cassiopeia. First champ going in the S tier. Cassie doesn't really lose to anything. She has insane chase. She has good safety net. She has just overall, her kit just gives her, just provides her with enough safety that she just doesn't really lose to any top laners. There are some which can contest, and she can play more safe into these matchups, but her range, her Q speed, her sustain through her E, Phase Rush, Conqueror, you have both these options, so we'll give her a lot of power. Definitely blindable at the moment. Mordekaiser, quite always been a really good blindable option. He doesn't dominate in games. He has a relatively normal win rate, nothing too extraordinary there, but Mordekaiser just beats a lot of champs in 1v1. Of course, gets punished by things like GP, Olaf, stuff like this, can punish Mordekaiser. Fiora, another champ which can definitely punish Mordekaiser. But overall, he does just beat most champions in 1v1s. He doesn't really struggle during laning phase. He has good sustain through the W, good chase with the passive, good 1v1 potential with the ult. Overall, his Q gives him enough range that, in general, you can't really break a Mordekaiser, but he does get outscaled by most things, and that is really where his weakness lies. He will get kited. Things like Vayne definitely can punish Mordekaiser, but a lot of the champs which can punish Mordekaiser don't see a lot of play. Fiora, really, really powerful champion, has great escape, great 1v1 potential, good sustain. It's really hard to play against a good Fiora, and even if you're playing some of the matchups which can beat her, she can sometimes just nullify the laning phase, and with things like Ravenous, about having good sustain and wave clear, can make Fiora quite unplayable against, so she is really valuable as a blind pick in that. Kled, really powerful in his 1v1 potential, has a decent amount of sustain when you go for Ravenous as well. Both these champs really good abusers of Ravenous, and that gives them a lot of sustain. Olaf, another champ which is really good with Ravenous. What you'll tend to find is some of the more blindable champs can abuse Ravenous. The sustain and the damage the item provides and the wave clear just allow them to push waves or sustain through or just out DPS a lot of champions. The item is kind of overloaded in the fact that it can do all three. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of power in these three champions. They can beat most things. They don't have a huge amount of answers. Zac and Maokai, more just sustain tanks. They're really hard to break because of things within their kit. Maokai being his passive, Zac also just kind of being his passive, and the revive he has. Overall, just gives these champs a lot of tools, makes it really hard for things like your Fioras, your Kleds, your Mordekaisers to like break them down and really punish them. Of course, anyone in this list can like in, and if you in, then your champ struggles to be blindable. But overall, the S tier, really powerful options. Have maybe one answer or two answers which are popular at the moment, and you can ban them out most of the time. A tier is usually where you're going to see like champs which with 1, 2, 3 answers, or their answers are really popular, and you can usually ban one out, but then you can kind of expect the other, and maybe sometimes you can play around these. B tier, this is like you're above average. Most of these champs will get punished by certain things, but they're like either unpopular or they're either unpopular or they're relatively limited, and they might only just be meta things. C tier, you don't really want to blind these champions. They get punished by a decent amount of things. They they are either relatively weak, cheese, or get punished by a decent amount of things. D tier, get punished by almost everything. You can't really afford to blind these champions. They come in as counter picks. A lot of their blind picks, a lot of their value, I can't speak anymore. But D tier struggles because a lot of the champs which counter pick them are within the meta at the moment, and they don't have a lot of options in that. And Yasuo, don't play this champion. He loses to mostly everything in the top lane. You can beat some things. He's more of just a skill check champion, like I said. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. See you in the next one. Goodbye.